I told you that this course makes some students want to scream, um, and so because of some of the confusions I noted in the response to the video introduction for week 12, I'm giving this feedback an extra credit assignment. So just first back up a minute and think, how does this discussion of inductive and deductive arguments fit into the overall course? Well, recall we said that a good argument, one whose conclusion it's reasonable to accept, is one that has true premises and the premises provide sufficient support for the conclusion. Now, we're studying logic to help us determine if the premises provide sufficient support for the conclusion. That is the second condition for a good argument. And logic examines the relationship of premises to conclusion. Now, we said that there are two ways in which premises are related to conclusions. Some are intended, in some arguments, the premises are intended to provide probable support for the conclusion. In some arguments, the premises are intended to provide absolute or certain support for the conclusion. And so these terms become very important. Inductive, strong, and cogent, they go together. And deductive, valid, and sound go together. In both cases, the latter terms are evaluative terms for the first term. Flashcards become especially useful here. Make flashcards for these terms. You got to memorize them. You can't just think you know them. You've got to memorize them, and flashcards provide a means for checking your knowledge. So make flashcards for these terms. Remember, inductive argument, argument whose premises are intended to establish the truth of the conclusion with some degree of probability. This is from a little more likely true than not to nearly certain. A strong argument is an inductive argument whose premises, if assumed to be true, establish the truth of the conclusion with some degree of probability. So, now, if we determine that the argument is strong and actually has true premises, not just assumed to be true, then the argument is cogent. Make flashcards for these three terms and recognize that you use strong about an inductive argument. You use cogent about an inductive argument that is also strong. Now, make flashcards for these terms. A deductive argument, an argument whose premises are intended to establish the truth of the conclusion with certainty. Now, if we have a deductive argument and we determine that if those premises are true, so if the premises are assumed to be true, then the premises establish the truth of the conclusion with certainty. Stated differently, if the premises are true, it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. Now, if we determine an argument is valid and we also establish that the premises are true, then we have a sound argument. So you're going to have to forget our everyday uses of the term valid and sound. Oftentimes, we just use valid to mean something is good. A driver's license is valid if it's not expired, but notice in this course we have very specific meanings of those terms, and you'll have to memorize them. Now, so in inductive argument, then remember this: it's a strong argument plus true premises equals a cogent argument. Now, remember that the premises of an inductive argument are intended to provide probable support, not certain support, but probable. So it's not unreasonable to reject the conclusion of a cogent argument, because again, an inductive argument leaves some room for the conclusion to be false, even if those premises are true. But remember this: an inductive argument, okay, it's a valid argument plus true premises gives you a sound argument. It is unreasonable to reject the conclusion of a sound argument, because if we then establish that premises of a valid argument true, then the conclusion must be true. Now, to reject a sound argument, you would need to show that one or more of the premises are not true. That's typically you're not going to undo the logic, but you may show that the premises are false. Let's apply this. Let's apply what we've said about inductive arguments here. You're going to be applying what we say about deductive arguments in the upcoming assignment. So Madeline says, most people in North Carolina believe that women should have legal access to abortion with some restrictions. I say this because all the people I know say that they agree with this. Well, you immediately recognize this as a generalization, which is a type of inductive argument. Now, remember, its generalization is weak if the sample is either too small or not representative. It is very unlikely that the people Madeline knows is a large enough sample or representative enough to represent all North Carolinians. So you know that the argument is weak. If it's weak, then you need not really check the truth of the premises. I mean, is she really telling the truth that all of her friends agreed? Has she really checked them all? But even if the premise is true, let's assume she's telling the truth. Everybody she knows she's asked this question and they've all given this answer. The argument is not good because it commits the errors of hasty generalization, biased generalization. Even if the premise is true, it does not provide sufficient support for the conclusion. By contrast, what if Madeline says, well, most people in North Carolina believe that women should have legal access to abortion with some restrictions? I say this because I saw a poll yesterday conducted by 3 FSU professors that showed 67% of North Carolinians agree with this statement. Well, you recognize this is a generalization, but this time the premises refer to a poll conducted by a reputable source. So assuming Madeline's telling the truth about the poll and its results, the argument is strong. Now that we've determined the argument is strong, we must check the truth of the claim. Was such a poll conducted? When? Is the sample large enough and representative enough? What's the margin of error? If we establish the truth and the reliability of the poll, then we can say that Madeline's argument is cogent, strong plus true premises. Now, would it be reasonable to reject the conclusion about what the majority of North Carolinians believe about abortion? Yes, since an inductive argument never claims to yield certain results. We may want to do further research. But right now, based on what we know, it's more likely true than not that most North Carolinians favor the conclusion. Now, let's try another one. Marie says, my great uncle got a flu shot and caught the flu anyway. Flu shots don't work. You immediately recognize this is an argument about causes and effects. Flu shots don't work. That's the same thing as saying flu shots do not prevent the flu. They do not cause you not to get the flu. Now, you also recognize this is a weak argument because the evidence Marie cites is anecdotal. Surely one person getting sick does not establish that flu shots are dangerous or useless. You don't even need to check the truth of the premise. Did Maurice's great uncle really get a flu shot and really got sick? Even if it's true, it does not provide sufficient support for the conclusion. So it's a weak argument. You don't have to worry about the truth of the premise. But Marie says, okay, an experiment conducted by the FSU Science Department, 500 people who got flu shots were compared with 500 people who did not. Of the group who got flu shots, 20 or 4% got the flu. Of the group who did not get a flu shot, 60 or 12% caught the flu. Maurice concludes you are 3 times more likely to get the flu if you do not get a flu shot. Notice again, 12% versus 4%, that's 3 times as likely. So you recognize that Maurice is citing a cause and effect study conducted by FSU, a reputable source. So the argument is strong. If you check it out and find that Maurice is telling the truth, in fact, there was a study that yielded these results, then the argument is cogent. The conclusion then is likely to be true, and you can't reject this by appealing to anecdotal evidence. In week 12 and 13, you're going to do the same thing with deductive arguments, but for right now, please answer the questions for the assignment.